Thank you so much for the opportunity, for the partnership that the Mortgage Bankers Association has with Up for Growth, the ability to be here today to talk and work with like-minded organizations and individuals such as yourself, to hear about all these incredible ways that we could be addressing the issues in affordable housing, both on the single-family side as well as the multifamily side. We do a lot of work at MBA within our affordable housing initiative to move the needle, particularly on minority homeownership. And we've had the excellent opportunity of working and collaborating with Mike Kinsella and Anjali and the rest of the Up for Growth staff as we really try and hone in on the opportunities, initiatives, policy pieces, and regulatory changes that really could make the difference in the lives of those who need it. So I'm looking forward to today's panel, hearing more of some possible solutions and the ways we can address these problems together, because the reality is we can't boil the ocean alone. We need all of our different expertise, all the different skill sets that we have to bring to the table to really start pushing the needle and making a difference in the space. So thank you again for allowing MBA to be a part of today's event, and looking forward to hearing all that you have to say today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again, Caitlin, for your sponsorship and your support of this discussion. My name is Alyia Gaskins, and I am one of the newest members of the Alexandria City Council. My background is in, is in public health and urban planning, and housing is one of the key issues that I ran on. When I am not serving on the council, I'm also a senior program officer at the Melville Charitable Trust. For folks who are not familiar with Melville, we're one of the largest foundations solely focused on ending homelessness, and the work that I lead there is focused on land use, zoning, and housing justice. So I want to bring both a local government but also a philanthropic perspective to this panel. And really excited to be with you today. We are here, just to set the stage, we are here to discuss what will it take? What will it take to create more affordable workforce and market rate housing as a way to close and address our nation's housing crisis? And I think before we dive into the questions, I wanted to just kind of set the stage, because I think we really are having this conversation at a unique point in time. You know, we're having this conversation at a time when all of us know and recognize that housing costs are outpacing wage growth in this country. We're having it at a time when we have a shortage of more than 4 million homes that we need to build, and we're failing to keep pace, not just in terms of building that housing, but also creating the housing and the formations and types that people need and are demanding. We're having it at a time when all of us, especially those with particularly low incomes, are really feeling the effects of inflation, and everyone's paycheck feels like it's going less and less, and able to keep a roof and a stable home over their heads. And we're also having it at a time when I think our country is finally starting to recognize the significant racial disparities that have existed for decades when it comes to housing, whether we're talking about homelessness or home ownership. And so this panel, we've got expertise in building all different types of housing. We have expertise in terms of thinking about preservation strategies, tenant protections, new ideas, and innovations. And so we're going to dive in and get started right away. I do just want to give our panel a chance to introduce themselves. We're not going to go into their full bios because you have that, and that would take forever because they're so impressive. So I'm just going to ask each person to really start with your name, organization, but also when you think of housing, what are the words that resonate with you? And Antonio, we'll start with you.
So Antonio Marquez, I'm the founder and managing partner of Communidad Partners. So we're a 100% minority and women-owned affordable and workforce housing investment firm, really at the nexus of kind of ESG, racial equity, and prop tech. And so, and I just do want to say, just for a quick second, I won't take too long, but I just want to thank Up for Growth and Mike and Sil and the staff for. I just feel energized and and inspired through just the last day and a half being with practitioners and lobbyists and advocates. We're in an industry that can be a thankless business at times. And although the obstacles seem pretty formidable, I'm more encouraged than ever just being in the room with you all and hearing your stories and the solutions that we're driving. With respect to home, from my perspective, the first thing that comes to mind is really opportunity. If you don't have a stable home, you really can't get up in the morning, go work 9 to 5. My father was a Mexican immigrant, had housing challenges coming into this country, didn't have a credit score, it was hard to get housing access. So I view it as really kind of the springboard for not only stability but opportunity for families.
Thank you. And Genger.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Genger Charles. I'm a Managing Director of External Affairs and Impact Strategies at the Amherst Group, which is a real estate investment platform based in Austin, Texas, really working at the intersection of meeting unmet consumer demand for attainable, affordable housing units, as well as bringing online obsolete or otherwise dilapidated units. Antonio stole my word.
Oh, no.
So,
I looked at your notes, I was still
but I am going to double down on it, and it sounds like he and I have a very similar story. I too am the child of immigrants who really worked hard to create an opportunity through their housing choice, and so they're seeking to get a yard and a place for me to play in a safe community really has propelled me to who I am today. So for that, I thank them, and I'm really glad to be here.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Angela Brooks. I'm here wearing 2 hats. So my non-paid job is I'm the president-elect for the American Planning Association, which is the largest professional organization for urban planners in the world. And on my paid job, I am the director of the Illinois office of the Corporation for Supportive Housing. We look at permanent housing solutions, and we're also a CDFI, because a lot of people don't realize we're also a lender, which is a good part of our work. When I think about home, it's not as interesting as either of you, as my parents are not immigrants, but my parents are both born in the South and moved to Seattle, Washington, where I was raised for opportunity. My parents grew up in the segregated South, and my dad has been there since he was 10, so he could get an education. So when I think of home, I think of peace, I think of calm, and I most certainly think of stability. And without that, I can't imagine any other part of my life would go well, which is why I've dedicated my professional work to providing housing access for all.
My name is Craig Parker. I'm the CEO of Holland Partner Group. We are a multifamily and mixed-use developer focused primarily on the West Coast. We do go as far east as Denver, but that's about the extent of it. 100% mixed rate. We do have some affordable, but no more than 20% typically integrated into our projects. I'm excited to be here. I think as I think about the kind of the broad spectrum that we build within the market rate, the thing I think of most is community, right? Regardless of what it is, what type of project it is, or where it is, we're always trying to create that sense of home and that sense of community for our residents. And one of the things that we've found that we really focus on is creating that sense of community. Really, it makes it less of a commodity product, makes it less of something that people just call home for a year or two, and really gives them a sense of place.
Thank you, and I appreciate each of you starting there, because I think sometimes when we get into these conversations, we go right to the capital stack and the tax credit and all the really technical stuff. But just as complicated as that is, I mean, what home means to each of us and the types of places we're trying to create, whether that's opportunity, peace, stability, community, that has to be a part of this as well too, because it also impacts then where we create that housing, what it looks like, how it's designed, how it feels, and how we make sure it's accessible for more people. So I appreciate that. Craig, I want to start with you, because I want to just kind of continue to build on this piece about context and this moment we're in right now. Mm-hmm. I'd love for you to kick us off with a little bit of context. When did housing get so expensive? And what's driving these high costs?
Wow. Look, I think it's all relative, right? I think it's been getting increasingly more expensive for a long time, but over the last 2 years or so, we've seen a huge disruption. And again, I'll speak to our markets and what we're seeing here, but I think it built over time. I think particularly given these high barrier markets that make it really difficult to start new projects, you combine that with a single family housing boom, you combine that with job growth and other needs within the commercial space, and then you layer in the supply chain disruptions within the global pandemic, and it's gotten exceedingly expensive over the last couple of years. The supply chain has done one thing with respect to the actual material cost and the cost of getting these things constructed, whether it be shortage of materials or the them being trapped in a harbor somewhere, or simply the labor shortages that continue to exacerbate it. I think all of those things have started to run their course a little bit. I know in our markets I don't know that we've seen reductions other than in maybe some commodity spaces. Someone mentioned lumber earlier in one of the discussions, and while that has come down, labor's continued to push significantly higher. A lot of the other commodity products that we're seeing that we use in no matter the type of product that we're building, have continued to run. And so I think for me and for our firm, what we're hoping to see isn't necessarily a drawback in those costs, because I think that's a little bit unreasonable, but at least hopefully the moderation of some of those increases that make all of us who are trying to create housing, making those costs a little more predictable. And then I think you add to it the inflationary environment that we're in, and in a lot of areas, but not all unfortunately, we've seen wages continue to increase. We've seen the housing shortages in each of our markets continue to drive rental prices higher and higher. We saw a little bit of relief in the early parts of the pandemic, because at least for us in the gateway cities that we're in, a lot of people took that opportunity to move out. But what we did see is at the same time, a lot of people, whether they be the same or different, came right back in. The relief probably lasted 8 to 12 months tops in a lot of our Western gateway cities. And by mid-21, we were right back where we were pre-pandemic. And so this temporary disruption gave people a little bit of relief, but we're still seeing it continue to run. I think as you look at the forecast by all the prognosticators, again, focused on the markets that I'm most familiar with, it's going to continue in that manner for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 2 to 3 years. And so, our focus, and I think the focus of all of us, is increasing that supply, and that seems to be the only way that we're going to get this under control.
So I want to stay there for a second around the increasing the supply, because we know most of the projects you do are primarily market rate.
They are.
Some do have affordable housing, but the majority do not always in the markets you're in. Mm-hmm. And I guess as we think about this supply question, there are some who might argue, well, does type really matter? Should we just be building more housing regardless of, price point? And I'm curious your take on that and what that looks like in your industry.
Yeah, and look, maybe it's a little self-serving because we do build market rate, but yeah, I think there's a shortage of housing at every product type, at every income level, no matter where people are within that spectrum. So I think the increasing the housing stock in general, I think is going to have a beneficial effect, right? Clearly, the other folks on the panel here are focused on other types of housing than I am, and there's a lot of value in creating those specific ones as well. But I think overall supply, as we look at the underproduction study, it's abundant, right? It's not specific to any one type. I think this time we did it county by county, and so we can really see that it's not isolated to particular socioeconomic classes, not isolated to particular geographies. It's a broad spectrum. And so I think, even in our space, the opportunity that we have to continue to create supply, I think has an effect on the overall market.
Genger, I want to come to you next, because I know in your work you focused on, stock is not enough, that we need to have an intentional focus on affordable housing and really being explicit in how we're looking at affordable housing in different projects. So I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about, first and foremost, how are you defining affordable housing? Because I think sometimes we're not always on the same page. But then who and what types of communities have benefited the most from the work that you do?
Well, I think I will sort of pull some of the string from Craig here, and I would say I'm continuously perplexed at definitions of affordable that seem really just focused on subsidized. Thank you. Subsidies are a critical, important piece of our housing economy, and I will stand here and fully say, we don't invest enough in housing subsidies, but we also don't invest enough as a housing community, as a society, in meeting people where they are in the spectrum of affordable. As Craig said, there's a ton of different types of housing that would meet the needs, the supply needs of the United States consumer. And that is anything from like really fancy houses in the suburbs of Northern Virginia, all the way to a subsidized home and everything in between. On our platform, our average resident has an income range of $50,000 a year to $125,000 a year. And that's an average, and that's a huge range, right? If you think about what that means from a take-home pay, that is putting you into a very different type of home. And it is our view that we need to meet the people where they are. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a cookie cutter solution. We range from, on our platform, from newly built homes all the way to acquired, dilapidated properties that really need investment that would otherwise be deemed obsolete, but in many cases are today housing families who have landlords who are unable to make the investment that they need because they too are lacking the access to capital. And then to our new initiative around modular. And for us, that means we're able to meet people at affordable where they are. So if you take sort of that rule of thumb of 30% of your income on your housing cost, we tend to underwrite people at 25%. Things happen. So you want to leave a little cushion for folks. We also are actively in the housing choice voucher space. Again, back to the need to have subsidies and encourage. I encourage all landlords to take housing choice vouchers. And encourage the government to spend money on housing choice vouchers and other forms of housing subsidy as well. Because I think defining affordable as simply a subsidized investment and not accounting for what does it mean for that individual does a great disservice for us propelling the housing supply and needs conversation forward.
Antonio, I know that a lot of your work has focused on workforce housing, and I think sometimes we hear that in the context of talking about affordable housing and different types, but it is different. So can you explain a little bit about what are the nuances?
Well, first off, I appreciate Ginger's comments because I think when we start to put labels, on certain things, that creates divisions, right? And so when we really talk about equity, right, and we talk about affordable housing, workforce, attainable, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this, at its core, this is really a cost burden issue because that's the definition of affordability. Whether you're at 30% of AMI or 50% of AMI or 80% of AMI, we know that 50% of the country is cost burden, right? So this is a systemic, deep issue. And, from my perspective, the affordability is one that there's a lot of different ways that we can solve the problem, but we also have to have commonality in what is the problem, right? And define that. And I think it undermines really the effort around inclusion and equitable housing if we start to, again, try and be divisive about it. And we really need to have a unified front in what it is. Now, we can talk about different solutions for different levels of socioeconomic strata because there are unique challenges and nuances within those strata. At the 30% of AMI, that is just subsistence, at the end of the day. And so that set of challenges is different than again, a family of four that is, working at the local grocery store and they're making $32,000 a year, and they're living paycheck to paycheck. Again, they don't have subsidy. I don't think that, that household is any less deserving than support than a household at 30% of AMI. But again, the solution set, the tools in the toolkit should be a little bit different. So that we can, hopefully support and reduce the cost burden again, because I think that is the root cause issue that we're trying to solve.
I'm struck on what you said about agreeing that we all have a problem, or the commonality in the definition, because I can tell you there are times when I've gone to civic association meetings or conversations in my city, and the first thing folks will say, well, I don't agree that we have an affordability crisis, or I don't agree that there's a housing problem. And it's really hard to enter into any type of conversation once you start from there. Angela, I want to go to you next, and then I want to come back around to start to dive into what Antonio talked about the different solutions we might need. But Angela, in your work at the Coalition for Supportive Housing, you work with a very specific population that may not even be at 30%. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how some of our residents and neighbors with extremely low income, as well as a need for other supports, also fit into this conversation about the type of housing we need in communities.
Absolutely. 30% AMI is like my dream. Like, I don't see that very often. So I'm like, ooh, that's light rich. Yeah, no, I mean, at the beginning of my career in housing, I was an affordable housing developer for the Chicago Housing Authority. And I guess I didn't think that was difficult enough to solve for us. So I was like, let's go even lower. So, you know, I grew up with a great uncle who had intellectual developmental disabilities. And, you know, he was born in 1907. So I think about what could have happened if supportive housing was a thing for him. And we have a lot of people who are institutionalized, but could have a little bit of support, could live on their own. And that's the work we really do. And I mean, all of us need support. Like, every income tier needs some level of support in communities. That's why we're always talking about food deserts. We're talking about transit. So certainly the population I work with just needs a little bit more. And I think one of the things that we grapple with a lot, in another hat, I'm also on a zoning board of appeals, so I get to see it from a whole nother level, is how do we incorporate those individuals in our communities? Because we all know that we talk about mixed income a lot and the great needs for mixed income, and we certainly think about it in market and affordable, but we don't think about that lower tier and how they too benefit from living in mixed income communities. You kind of have to see it to be it, and that applies to everyone, right? So looking at what are those supports, and in Illinois specifically, if you get funding from the Illinois Housing Development Authority, they're 9% credits. You have to get what's called the state referral network units. It's a part of your deal. It's usually about 20%. And the state referral network are people that are in supportive housing. And so in my affordable hat, most of my deals were 9%. So I have experience of trying to incorporate that into a mixed income deal. And, you know, I think the perception of who that is exceptionally different. It's not necessarily someone who's going to be running down the hall screaming. So it's really changing that perception, and as well as realizing that the supports a lot of people use aren't that significant, and other people can benefit from it as well. But really looking at housing stability really does impact, because you're either going to deal with it in the housing side or you're going to deal with it outside. So it's like, where do you want to pick how you want to deal with those people with the most needs?
If we go to our then fundamental question of what will it take to get more of each of these types. Craig, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll kind of just go down the line.
Sure.
What would it take to create more market rate housing? Are there particular tools at the local, state, or federal level that are helpful to the work you do?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers that we're experiencing at the local and state level is just time, right? I mean, particularly in the state of California, I mean, we'll have entitlements that run anywhere from 6 years to 12 years. And so, you know, under the guise of time kills all deals, right? The ability to do that, just the wherewithal to work through that process, the attractiveness of locations like that for broad institutional investment, even for local investors like ourselves, creates barriers, right? It creates enormous barriers and costs. And so, you know, we all lament how much these things cost, but yet a lot of the policies that we're working through and the processes that we have to abide by simply create that. And so, you know, we're not going to be that successful trying to battle market forces and trying to make labor or the materials that we use less expensive, or the means and methods that we're using to take less time. We're not willing to cut corners in that way, and I don't think anyone else here would be either. And so, you know, trying to make the process more efficient, trying to make the process less onerous, and allowing housing to be developed in the areas where it's going to be most useful is one of the few things that we can continue to work with. And kind of the whole premise of Up for Growth when it first started was just that, in helping to identify, you know, the cost calculator that was developed for the organization to try to help people identify and understand the impact that the policies that are in place are having, the cost that it's creating, the time that it's taking. One of the few things that for local, state, and even federal governments that are focused on creating housing, I think that's the first place that they could help us.
In any of the markets that you're in, is there an example you can share where they've actually taken some concrete steps to improve the process?
No.
Okay. If there was an example, I'd want to lift it up.
No, what I would say is, you know, there are certain markets that are trying to simplify. I haven't seen it shorten at all. I will say in some, you know, Seattle is an example. The time has continued to elongate, but the process itself is fairly predictable. You know, in every market it has continued to elongate. But knowing the steps that we're going through, not getting trapped in, surprise moments or surprise requirements is about, at least in our West Coast markets, is about as good as we can hope for at this point. But very few cities, other than some of the suburbs, right? We do find ourselves in suburbs outside of some of these major markets that are really focused on creating new housing. And it's those smaller ones who maybe don't have as much housing opportunity or trying to make it really easy to get through. So those we really appreciate. But it's the major markets that have the biggest need and also the biggest opportunity to create housing are the ones that tend to be most difficult.
Well, I definitely wrote down, I know we get complaints that our process is 2 to 3 years, so comparing to 6 to 12, we're doing somewhat better. Angela, same question to you. What would it take to create more supportive housing, and any examples of tools that are working at the local, state, or federal level?
Yeah, and I'm going to answer from two hats because as an organization, the American Planning Association, part of what he's actually talking about is my field, or our field. Yes. And certainly one of the things APA is really working on, and it's kind of great to hear so many people talking about zoning reform, because we absolutely know the entitlement process is often prolonged by outdated zoning regulations. Like, many of them haven't been updated in this century, or really a long time in the last century. So certainly looking at, like, what are the zoning policies that are impacted? I'm on a zoning board of appeals, and I sit through half of our meetings like, does this really need to be a variance? Like, this 12-hour meeting could have possibly been 5. So certainly, which is still ridiculous. But, those are real things. And I mean, some things should just be outright. But we haven't changed the zoning code to really keep up with where we are as practitioners. So there's that. From supportive housing, and Genger kind of talked about it. I mean, affordable housing, we certainly need subsidy, but on supportive housing, we absolutely need subsidy, and we need partners like housing authorities and things of that nature that have it to really work as partners. But more importantly, we need funding for supportive services. So you're solving for the units, but it's also, we have to solve for the service budgets, and that isn't necessarily an easy job either. It actually might be a little bit more difficult. So looking at it from that perspective. And then just overall, I think one of the biggest impediments for us, and it's really nice to hear, there's a YIMBY Act in Congress, and that's bipartisan, and just kind of seeing people move the needle and think about what a community looks like really should be a community that has room for all tiers. That's what makes for a healthy, thriving community, and as more of us get on board and kind of change the perception of what that looks like, I think we'll all do better. So,
Genger, same question related to affordable housing.
I think what it would take, and Angela sort of previewed it, is really a focus on YIMBY instead of really being driven by the NIMBY. And I think about this in the context of, so for those in the room who haven't known me for a while, which I see many, my background is really in the mortgage finance space. So I had a number of roles at FHA, so I really am deeply into home ownership, view home ownership as a value. It's an important thing to create access to pathways to home ownership. The reality is the home ownership rate has consistently been 60, 65% for many decades. And that has not changed. And so 60, 65% home ownership for single family homes, that gives you the counterfactual of 35, 40% of rental for single family homes. And I think keeping that context in mind, and keeping in mind that, like I said at the beginning, my family wanted to give me a yard to play in and schools that were quality for me to go to get me on the path that got me on this stage today. And we see in a lot of communities today sort of this perspective of it's almost a puritanical view of, if it's a single family house, someone's got to own it. And if it's an apartment, someone's got to rent it, and never the two shall cross. And I think that does not really get to the foundational issues of, we don't have enough units, full stop. We need them in all forms, whether they are stick-built, multifamily, they are manufactured in an off-site property and moved onto the slab, whatever it is, we need all of those things. And we see a lot of communities today really taking activating their NIMBYism to try and create barriers to access to communities for people who may want to live in that house but can't afford to buy it because they don't have down payment, right? I don't think the administration did the student loan forgiveness simply because that was like a simple thing for them to do. They were thinking about some of the downstream impacts of student loan debt, right? We have a number of people who were impacted by the last Great Recession. I'm not saying we're in one now, I leave that to the smarter people, but who were impacted by the last recession who still don't have access to mortgage credit. When I was in the last, many administrations ago, we worked a lot on access to credit, and that challenge still persists, right? Erica spoke about it on the dais today. And so while we're trying to solve for those complexities in those stakeholder groups, I think we also need to stay focused on the solution, which is there aren't enough units. We need to put more units into the system, whether that is rehabilitating existing units and preserving them and investing in them, whether that is creating new units, whether that is taking off-site manufacturing and putting it in as infill or whole communities even. And I think the reality of our housing ecosystem today is that we are too focused on perhaps not finding the solutions and on why we shouldn't do something versus how we can do something to solve for the problems.
That's exactly right, Antonio.
Well said. Well said. And I also think we need to be thinking about it as a continuum, right? Because none of it is independent. Almost all of it is interdependent. And the sooner that we come to that realization and really try and work across the spectrum, I think we're going to get better solutions. That said, in terms of our space, which is middle income, missing middle, attainable workforce, whatever you want to call it, we're in the unenviable position where it's very hard to justify creation because we're still competing against costs for new development, high-rise development, luxury, but we're trying to hit a price point that is significantly less. So that those numbers just don't pencil, in the free market. At the same time, we don't have the benefit of light tech, right? So it's just kind of this no man's land and this void. And so the only real way to create is to be creative and be innovative and find unique ways to justify a deal. We're working on, my firm, Communidad, is working on a project in South Florida. It's a 200-unit attainable housing project in a racially diverse neighborhood that's being quickly gentrified near the coast, but still a little bit inland, and has service sector, has essential workers that serve the hospitality sector, the retail sector, office, and it's being depleted quickly. And so in that case, we got a grant from the city for $2.5 million, and that was the difference between making a deal pencil or not. Outside of that, I also have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the Workforce Housing Committee for an MHC, and with our constituent members, we polled them and saying, listen, what is moving the needle at the local level in terms of your projects? And overwhelmingly, it was local property tax exemptions. And that was the difference between being able to move forward with the project or not. So really working, and we had a panel earlier about federal policy and really figuring out what are the sticks and carrots that can actually transmit and translate into action at the local and state level to really activate some of these property tax exemptions. There's PFCs in the state of Texas. There's others in Florida. California has come up with one similar. So property tax exemptions is one. Middle-income housing tax credit would be nice. My wish list, but there are some hurdles. But I really do believe that if it was done the right way, again, this isn't zero sum. This isn't if there was a MyTech appropriation that's really taking away from LIHTC. It really can be complementary to those two efforts. And you're seeing an increasing amount of mixed income in these local jurisdictions anyways. And again, on the equity piece, we really need to be intentional about creating, and this is from personal experience in terms of our affordable portfolio, there are residents that will not go out and get that job because they don't want to exceed that income threshold and no longer qualify from an income recertification perspective. So that is really eroding the American household wealth, the American household wealth and opportunity. But if they had an opportunity to move into that next tier and still have some level of support, that would be transformative for them. And also, again, coming back to what home is, it's opportunity, giving those folks and those families an opportunity to get better jobs, to get better health access, to get better educational opportunities. And finally, really, I think we also need to reimagine what creation is. I think the White House Supply Action Plan did this pretty well, and creation just isn't building dirt from ground up. Creation is also preservation, right? I think you can have addition by preventing subtraction, if that makes sense, because we're losing this missing middle housing to the tune of 100 to 200,000 units per year. So it's a depleting resource, almost like water and timber, and I think we need to be treating it as something that is essential and vital to American working families throughout the country. And there's great opportunities to preserve, and even from a self-imposed perspective. There's a lot of preservations. I know some folks and some peers in this room have done a really good job of self-imposing income restrictions, like AJ and JBG, in terms of their homes. And through that, a unit that was market rate, you're bringing rents down to make affordable, and that's, in essence, creation, right? And there are instruments that are out there through Joint Powers Authority. The agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, are really kind of pushing this, especially after the Equitable Housing Finance Plan came out, where they're providing incentives to actually bring rents down or maintain your rents at a certain level so it meets income preservation levels. And I will add, they are doing it in a way where it's creating mixed income, kind of this kind of strata of different diversification of incomes, households, and backgrounds, which is really exciting to see.
I love what you at Genger were raising around kind of creativity, reimagining, but also how do we think about different solutions? Because I think oftentimes our fields aren't taught to ask that question of like, what can you do differently? How can we change this? And I'm thinking there was a recent case that came before our council, and it was for it's a conversion of an old office building, and it's near Metro, it's near a ton of great jobs, it's walking distance to many different things. And when it came before the council, there was a proposal for no units of affordable housing. And when we asked staff, why was that? Why that's not a part of the conversation? What they said was, well, they didn't ask for a density bonus. They weren't asking for any specific changes under our current policy, so therefore that did not trigger us to ask the question about whether or not this should have affordable or even other types of housing in it. And so we ended up having this long conversation from the dais about then, what do we need to change so that it's not just the policy that maybe triggers those questions, but it's our thinking of how do we look at this project for how it's going to benefit our whole city? What are the things we need, and what are the questions we need to be asking to do something differently? Because it'll take us a while to change the policy, but we're going to have these new projects coming before us every single day. I do want to touch on, so I know sometimes in these conversations when we talk about what else will it take, another piece is around technology and innovation in the field and how do we get there. And so Genger, I know you're working on some things related to modular housing and manufactured housing. I'd love for you to talk about how does that fit in this conversation?
Yeah, and the person who taught me everything I know about manufactured housing is sitting over there in that front row. Hi, Megan. So we have been at the Amherst Group really looking at different ways to, again, bring units into communities, meet consumers where they are, and have spent some time working with partner facilities. And we actually just acquired a facility that hopefully will be up and running this year, a former mill in a town in Texas, really designed to create our own in-house stock of modular homes. So we've been doing that probably for a couple of years now, and really look at that from the frame of, one, there's a lot of need for infill, right? And there's a lot of need to add units in places that are relatively small lots, but that could benefit from the existence of a home. And we can do that. We recently did a workforce housing density program in St. Petersburg, Florida, where we were able to add 3 units onto a plot that I think was zoned for 1. And we were able to do that using manufactured housing, and we're able to do that over the course of, I think from start to finish, 6 months. And when I say start, I mean, units being created on a factory floor, all the way to installation, and now, pending some bureaucratic things, over to leasing to households that need access to those units in St. Petersburg that keep them closer to their homes, closer to their jobs, closer to the schools they want to be in, and closer to just the lives they want to lead. From the things for a long time, the rules around manufactured, it's faster. You can control the environment. So by doing it inside the factory, you're able to sort of avoid the impact of weather, for instance, on a stick-built home. And you're able to also do that in a way that is more environmentally sustainable. We can control for waste, energy, water, et cetera. So we're really excited about deploying that in our markets. And we've already been doing that with great success. I think the challenge we sometimes see with that is manufactured housing does suffer from a reputation issue. Whether it is modular like ours and it looks exactly like the stick-built house that has been there for 10 years next door to it, there is a reputation concern. There is this perception of safety as a challenge, which I think we've found is unfounded. And trying to get local officials to see kind of past this idea of this Tornado Alley sort of perception and look at manufactured and modular homes as an opportunity to actually deliver quick, durable supply in their communities, and do that whether, in our case, it's a rental housing option. In other cases, it can be a home ownership option. And either way, it's a solving for the lack of units solution. And so from our perspective, it's really an ability for us to drive supply quickly and efficiently and safely to create access to attainable units.
Craig, Angela, Antonio, do either of you have comments on how technology is changing the way you do these types of investments?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time looking mostly at construction technology, different ways to prefabricate not so much modular units, but prefabricated components that go into the building. Mm-hmm. And again, it's focused on the one thing that we feel like we can control, which is time. And so giving us the ability to erect buildings more quickly, giving us the ability to make it safer on site for the people that are doing that type of work, in hopes that we can shorten the overall construction time and bring each of these units to market more quickly. And so, we've explored a lot of different options. We're working with a company right now, actually, the technology was created in Australia. The biggest challenge that we have on the West Coast is getting new technologies like this approved from a seismic standpoint. And so we're going through with some of the municipalities and trying to educate them on how these are built, on how they're engineered, on testing, in order to try to get some flexibility around the standard means and methods that we've used for the past 40 years to allow us to really start to innovate from a construction standpoint. And no matter how long it takes to get to a point of approval, actually get a finished product much more quickly that still stands up to the same level of quality, the same level of safety as it would if we followed the means and methods that we've had for decades now. And so it's promising. There's a tremendous amount of investment going into kind of prop tech as well as I don't know, construction tech or whatever you want to call it in that space. Mm-hmm. That I think is going to have a lot of promise over the next decade or so. But I think it's been slow to get acceptance in certain markets, and that's really the area of opportunity for us now.
I think from the APA side, one of the trends we're looking at is 3D printing. Certainly kind of one of those things we've been watching. I think the largest proposed development is actually in Austin. 3D printer Icon is looking at doing 100 units. They've already produced in Amsterdam a 3D printed bridge, so the 3D infrastructure is coming. Still on the research side on my personal take. And before I left the Housing Authority, a lot of our developers were starting to look at modular for some of the multifamily development. Our per unit cost when I left was about $360 per unit, which is pretty substantial. So anything to reduce that, because that's pretty high for an affordable unit. So looking at modular options. And you're right, getting through the entitlement on that has required a lot of education and getting people comfortable with that. So.
Yeah, I think people are just generally scared of the unknown. For those that have to put their stamp on it and approve it, there's just a lot of education that goes into it.
Land use and financing. So, but I think the market opportunity is vast enough and it's deep enough. Someone will figure it out, right?
Yeah.
It's almost akin to how the green movement with LED. There was early adopters, very expensive, started to get traction. Then when you hit that scale velocity, then it gets to a price point. Then there's mass adoption. Just two add-on thoughts, just because those are all great comments on modular. In the prop tech space, where we're seeing a lot of innovation occurring is in two areas: is market selection and then resident experience, which I'm really passionate about. And on the market selection side, it's really at the census tract level, is identifying not only just some of the Census Bureau statistics around population, job growth, income growth, and that sort of thing, but also some of the impacted predeterminants around health access, education, poverty, all these different things that are really integral to our strategy. And if we, through our work, which kind of dovetails into our resident experience piece, where we have a digital intervention with our social impact, where and COVID was really the genesis of all this, because the mother of necessity is invention. And so what we ended up doing is we started with a virtual healthcare program, partnering with Aetna and CVS, provided free teledoc to our residents. So irrespective of where you come from or where you work, employment shouldn't be a prerequisite to having health access. And so we provided that to our residents, among other really interesting technologies. So it's just a really fun time to be in the space where, multifamily has been historically antiquated, but you're seeing all these new technologies, which frankly can be overwhelming. So going through all the process of the proliferation of all these tools and figuring out what is meaningful and how you can ultimately integrate it to improve the resident experience and truly drive value for all stakeholders. It's been great, and there's, I think, some incredible opportunities on the horizon.
So we're probably going to go to audience questions very soon, so please start getting your questions ready. But before we do, and Antonio, you were starting to touch on this, I think this question of how do we get more, the other part is how do we get more and ensure it benefits the folks who need it most. And so I'd love for us to talk about equity. I know it came up in the conversation about homeownership, but equity in terms of the conversation and who benefits, especially our communities of color who for decades, whether it's through redlining or urban renewal and other policies, have not always been the benefit of new housing investments. So Angela, I'll start with you because I know APA is doing some work around planning for equity, zoning for equity, but then want to get the perspective of everyone else on the panel as well.
Yeah, actually, one of the more exciting things about APA right now is we are working. 2 years ago, we did our planning for equity guide. Now we're going with the zoning for equity, and it's really looking at practical tools for planners and politicians and jurisdictions to really look at how zoning regulations, which, to be honest, started as a main tool of segregation. So, like, how do we eradicate that, and what are some practical tools that can implement? Because you're a council member, so you understand that practitioners often get resistance on the political end, so some real practical tools and some historical lessons to remind people how we got here. So certainly looking at that. And then thinking about equity in this lens of permanent supportive housing. In Chicago, 85% of the homeless population is Black, 20% of the city population. So I spend the majority of my time thinking about equity and thinking about the cute, sexy term everybody likes is opportunity areas, but we all know that people of color statistically live in neighborhoods that don't reflect their income. So it's really hard for me to tell a person who's unhoused, hey, you should go live in this really great neighborhood. I found a unit, when I myself live in a neighborhood that doesn't reflect my income. So really looking at not just opportunity areas, but creating equal access in every neighborhood. Every neighborhood should have amenities. Every neighbor should have these things. It shouldn't just be, we're going to move you out of that instead of it's just equal investment. So really looking at how do we direct investment to create communities that are pretty equal everywhere. And so I think when I look at equity as a practitioner, that's the type of thing I look at, because it's not just about porting somebody somewhere else. Sometimes it's about creating areas that they want to live in, because I myself don't live in one of those neighborhoods, and I could. So just being realistic and looking in the mirror at some of my policy thoughts and really implementing those.
Genger.
From my perspective, I think part of the equation is not just the where, right? The opportunity of the geography and the benefits that come with being in a certain neighborhood or community, but I think it also, and Antonio touches on this a little bit, it's also the experience of living in a property. Like, we are very focused on housing stability at Amherst and what it means to not only qualify for the property that you're living in, but how can we sustain that your presence in that property? What are the investments? What are the sort of wraparound services that we can provide that will help you to be a successful renter, to help you achieve, if your goal is home ownership, what can we do to help you get to achieve that goal? Or if your goal is to live in a particular particular community as a renter, we are happy to help you, to help support that as well. But what are the tools we can give you to do that? So for us, that means including things like access to housing counselors or social workers who can help you focus on the stability of your housing opportunity and help you think about the next one. It's educational modules. It is, access to social workers who can help you, connect you to resources. We run on my team the incidence of rental assistance for the platform as well. So we take stability really seriously, from sort of the sort of thought process of what it means to feel comfortable in your home to, like, what does it mean to actually not get removed from your home, and all the things in between, and making sure that we are there with the residents throughout the duration of that. And I think in doing that and in creating that infrastructure for our residents to feel stable in their housing situation, you can also help to create the opportunity set for new and evolving perspectives there as well.
Antonio, I'd love to go to you next, and maybe you can touch a bit on the resident outreach piece that you guys have done.
Yeah, so Genger took my word in the beginning, and I took your word, and then now vice versa. But no, I couldn't agree with you more, Genger, and think, honestly, those are, because we're focused a lot on the supply side, and that's an extraordinarily important issue, but I don't think there's enough attention spent on the demand side support. And of course, Section 8 is an incredibly important program, and Doug and others have really advocated for really streamlining that, making it frictionless, which is really important. But also, how can we help residents, enable them, activate them, empower them, and elevate them to their highest and best potential? We talked a lot about highest and best use in terms of real estate, but what about the resident? The resident is our real asset. None of us would be in this room, at least in the multifamily industry, or even if you're in single family, without the resident paying their rent, or a homeowner paying their mortgage, right? Or buying mortgage, or making that transaction. And so I think the more that we can view them as a real asset and injecting services that are really supportive to them, jobs programs that can help them have better jobs that are more durable, that are higher paying, after school programs that are free, again, free healthcare that really reduces the household cost burdens. We've talked about not just housing, but utility expenses, other things. How can we reduce the entire stack of household cost burdens and really expand disposable income, within households, and really be intentional and, again, meaningful about how do we improve resident equity or homeowner equity through all these different tools. And I think that is really the transformative change that we can offset and mitigate some of these affordability issues as well. And then lastly, I think I also believe, in terms of really, how can we truly effectuate change? I think it's also capital, frankly. It's capital is power, like it or not. If it's used for good or used for bad, but it is, right? And so I think it's putting that into the hands of folks that come from the areas that are invested and have challenges. And I also think we need to be careful, because the whole racial equity movement, which is very important, we need to make sure that we don't alienate other folks or other constituents, but we clearly articulate how everyone benefits through this greater union, right? And thinking about it as just a bigger pie. And I think we oftentimes, it's human nature to feel threatened because something's being taken away from us. But if we can look at it as being more additive to everyone's outcomes and everyone's prosperity, I think that's kind of the message that we need to drive home.
And Craig, I'd love your perspective, I guess specifically around how, if at all, are market rate developers thinking about the equity implications of their developments?
Honestly, probably not in the same way that everybody else is on this group, but one of the things that we have tried to do, and we've only been able to do it where we have relationships with home builders, is we've tried to make home ownership more attainable. Right? We've piloted a couple of times where we've tried to take a portion of people's rent and basically create a little bit of a fund for them to help with down payment support, to try to help people get from rental housing if they aspire to home ownership, us to be a catalyst for that. And so it's not a program that we can run everywhere, right? We probably need to step back and get a little more creative as how we can make it relevant when people are buying existing home stock, because we haven't been able to bridge that gap just yet. But really trying to use residency within one of our properties as a catalyst for home ownership for all of our residents, right? Those that are interested in it, regardless of where they came from or what their own economic situation is, to try to help them achieve that.
So I
Can
want to
just
go
add
ahead.
in some examples. So like, for instance, at the Chicago Housing Authority, they have a program called Choose to Own, where they allow residents who are interested to use their vouchers to purchase homes. So to date, they're probably at about a little over 750 homes that have been purchased by Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher or public housing residents, which is a pretty great example of a way to use existing voucher support to create home ownership opportunities. And it has the whole credit counseling and all the things leading up to that, but it's probably one of the more progressive things CHA has done in the last decade.
No, thank you for that example. I wanted to open it up to the audience. If you have a question, if you could just raise your hand. Okay, we'll start right here. Yes, it's coming.
Krieger, Bridge Housing Corporation. We are active from San Diego to Seattle. We have about 70 projects in our pipeline, 10 under construction. One thing that we've found very recently as a kind of a fertile area for cooperation between local governments and housing developers. In 2019, the Washington State Legislature directed cities to provide religious organizations bonus density incentives. They didn't say how much, they didn't say how come. They said do it and have it done when they apply for affordable housing. There is some sideboards on it. Affordable housing has to be affordable for a determinate period of time. I think it's at least 50 years, for example. So in 2021, Seattle City Council did enact their version of this. It provided an additional floor of height on existing zoned properties. So working with a private property developer, Security Properties, we are co-developing 290 units of housing on a church property in the Ballard neighborhood, one of the most heavily gentrified neighborhoods of Seattle. And this is a little tiny Episcopal church, been there over 100 years, 112 years, 50 members, and we're producing 290 units of housing on the church property leased. So the church will get 290 units of housing back in 99 years. In the meantime, they'll get a new sanctuary paid for by the market rate housing. And we will provide them with a capitalized lease payment for our land, which will essentially provide all the tenant improvements for the church. So you replicate that from one jurisdiction to the other. We're working in Bellevue. Bellevue has 1,000 churches. It's only 150,000 population, but they have synagogues, they have temples, they have churches, large and small. And I think there's kind of an unlocked potential there, because many of these churches are on large properties they bought in the 50s or 60s. In the case of St. Luke's, 1908, the land was kind of a de minimis thing, so they have extra property. And the alignment of values is quite strong. The church wants to do something for families. They like seniors. They don't have any problem with change. And it's a way for them to sort of reset their ministry of service to the community. So thinking out loud about what planners can do, what cities can do to help engender this sort of thing, it's a natural resource. And church-owned property is often like low-hanging fruit. And I really encourage it. They're often in some of the best physical locations, next to schools, obviously, and next to parks, that sort of thing. So reducing barriers through, in this case, it was a land use code. We're getting an 8-story building. We would have produced a 7-story building. That's a win. Would it have made the difference? Probably not. I think both security properties and Bridge would have been happy to coexist in that space, but it does offset our inflationary cost. You know, that additional floor, that additional 12 units is going to cover what we probably have spent in the last 2 years in inflation.
I have a church in Seattle I grew up in. You need to talk to them.
I mean, I can speak to that. So all points extraordinarily well taken. And so there was a statistic that churches or faith-based organizations are the largest real estate owner in the country, right? Now, you do have a tapestry of different denominations and that sort of thing, but there are some organizations that serve as these clearinghouses and just associations, and it's not denominational. The project that I was mentioning in Miami is with a faith-based organization. It's a long-standing church, Black congregation that's been deeply entrenched in the community since the 50s, and so they were at the risk of displacement because of all the investment. And so a very similar story, and I think to your point, the amount of goodwill that we've been able to build from the community. I mean, our entitlement period has been 10 months. We're talking about 2 to 3, 6 to 10 years, and that sort of thing. Now, you're not going to get that in every single jurisdiction, but I think, again, this is really kind of that grassroots support, right, where you can actually get constituents on the ground that really support this. You want to talk about YIMBYism? That's a great way to actually effectuate YIMBYism at the local level. So very well, all points very well taken, and anyone that is considering more of this type of product, I urge you to look at those types of organizations as potential partners.
Yeah, and I would just add, in Alexandria, we have also seen similar success. Our challenge is we're 13 square miles, and we're not getting more land. And so really thinking about creative on where are those places where folks have existing very large parking lots or parks or things that we might be able to reimagine. And I think we have 3 or 4 partnerships with religious organizations underway already. So thank you. It looked like there was a question over here. Somebody was lifting their, okay, AJ.
Yes. I just want to highlight something that Genger and Antonio talked about in terms of conversion and creation through preservation. We've raised a fund and in the past 19 months created 1,750 units of committed affordable housing between 50 and 120% of AMI for anywhere between 20 to 99 years. And we've only deployed $40 million of the fund to do that. And we've done it by buying existing assets and putting long-term covenants on them. So sometimes preservation is creation. And it kind of boggles my mind in the context of housing. I was thinking about this the other day, that we think about it differently in terms of creating affordability than any other aspect of life, right? We don't buy new Teslas for people who need transportation. We give them bus passes or we buy them used cars. But somehow when it comes to housing, we want to build in the case of California, the $1 million unit LIHTC, as opposed to buying the existing asset, which to Antonio's point, we're losing 100, 200,000 of those units every year. Buying that unit and preserving it and allowing the capital to flow to the highest level of production, right? So we actually get more new housing stock and new affordability. So I really want to highlight that, because I think in this whole context of the discussion about creation, we do need more net new units. We do need more LIHTC units and more units at every income level. But there's a lot that we could be doing with existing assets to create affordability, which also, by the way, happens to be in high opportunity locations. By and large, we only invest in high opportunity locations, but tends to be in high opportunity locations where you can deliver the affordability today in the places that are more impactful to people at a lower cost per dollar than we're currently doing it.
Anyone want to comment on sort of what else we can be doing related to preservation?
Well, I mean, just to kind of springboard off of AJ's points, I mean, so the math is very creative. It's very clear. The cost benefit by orders of magnitude is significantly less cost from a new development perspective. But also when you take into account the climate resiliency aspects of that and the ability to actually tap in and utilize and even make them make existing product more energy efficient, and all the greenhouse gas emissions and all the other things that come from a creation perspective, it actually really aligns well with all those different aspects. And even in the White House Supply Action Plan, I mean, they actually specifically mentioned this, which is great. I think we need to encourage a lot of our peers and folks that are lobbying and advocating on the Hill and with our senators and congressmen, that should be a primary focus, because historically creation has been perceived as the only real solution. And I think it's because we haven't had these, conversations, this discourse in terms of really kind of unpacking kind of the nuances of what really preservation is, and ultimately how it can benefit that, the supply crisis that we're experiencing.
Can I just add to that? This might be mildly controversial. First, shout out to my friends at FHA who will, if anyone needs help accessing capital for preservation, they are there for you in the Office of Multifamily Housing. But also, I think we think of preservation very narrowly, and I think that does us a disservice as well. So, and this came up earlier, in a few instances, preservation is not just multifamily, 5+ units, dilapidated, or otherwise just, approaching obsolescence. It also needs to exist in the single family space. And it is not something in our current consumer-facing financing infrastructure that can be done easily, right? I think back in my FHA days, we were talking about 203K mortgages. I'm sure they're still talking about 203K mortgages. They're hard to get. They are hard to finance. And there needs to be an infrastructure for also investing in that single-family obsolete property. And I think a lot of the narrative we hear it is really creating disincentives for people to do that and put those back into use, where we can't afford to not preserve those units and to put them into use for people who need them.
Genger, how do you suggest, or what ideas do you have about how we change that narrative and make the case for why that segment of preservation is also needed?
I think this also, more controversy potentially. I think, honestly, I think it goes back a little bit to history and this idea. So I think I threw out this stat earlier, right? Home ownership rate is 65%, which takes you to this 35 to 40% single family leased homes market. But I think we think of, if it's a single family house, it's owned by someone, and ownership is assigned to a certain population of people. And if it's a rental, it needs to look like something else, and it's for other people. Mm-hmm. And I think this has something to do with our history of redlining and all sorts of other discrimination in the housing space. But I think the reality is, for lots of reasons, maybe due to the consequences of redlining, for lots of reasons, Black and brown communities or people who have had struggles, millennials with student loan debt, others have problems accessing tools for financing purchase money mortgages, and whether it's down payment or credit score or other things in the housing market. And because we have this mentality of if it's a single family house, it's really targeted for ownership, we are really looking past the need to house people that need it and who may want to live in that single family house and who may want the benefits that come with that particular place where that house is. And I think probably those who are in the business of contributing capital to the preservation of single family homes need to think about not only the dichotomy between ownership and rental and sort of the history around that, but also need to be very focused on, again, the consumer experience when that rental opportunity presents itself, because it shouldn't be a set it and forget it mentality. I think when it's a concentrated number of units in an apartment building, you can't help but have things that happen in common areas or think about the whole of the community. When it's scattered site, I think there can be an instinct to sort of like treat it as if you're an individual investor who moved into your second house and they'll call you if something's wrong. But the reality is scattered site multifamily is happening. It's here to stay. It is a thing that we need because there are a lot of dilapidated units out there. I know we, as an example, put a minimum of $25,000 into a house. A homeowner cannot do that on their purchase. And so I think really considering more of the, both the opportunity set and the need for ranges of housing, again, being very YIMBY, like bring it all in. Whatever it looks like, we need it, so let's have it. And really thinking about, again, what is the experience for the resident living in that situation, and how should what lessons can you take from a multifamily apartment building? And really just, being good people about being in service of other people.
All right, we probably could take one or two more questions. Right here.
Hi, my name is Adina. I work for a private developer. I wanted to raise a couple of points. The first one being that when we talk about market rate, it doesn't have to be a separate category from affordable and workforce. There are market rate solutions that are affordable to people with moderate to low income housing, moderate to low incomes. And so I just wanted to broaden the scope there. I think that for Craig, a good place to watch is LA's transit-oriented communities, because it gives developers a lot of automatic kind of things like FAR and allowing for density and zero parking. And because it's done that way, the time to permit is significantly reduced. So it's going to be interesting to watch how that affects the production and what you can make pencil. Because time to permit is just very, very, very important to making something, especially if you want to make market rate affordable housing, to make it work. Another thing that I think will be interesting to watch is what happens with Seattle's micro housing stock in terms of housing preservation for affordable housing. Even though some of these are very new developments, it's a place where I think the housing funds are going to be looking to be able to covenant in affordability.
Craig, I don't know if you want to comment or talk a little bit about the ways in which market rate housing is also interfacing with some of the other types here.
Yeah, and look, I don't disagree that I think, from an opportunity standpoint, there is very much, depending on where we're building and what we're building, there is a tremendous amount of market rate opportunity to get into all different income levels. We have found it to be harder in the gateway markets that we're in, simply because of the cost of land and the cost of labor. I think as we've continued to expand our own strategy into suburbs and into communities that have historically been more single family based, right? As people drive till they can afford something. There's a lot of development opportunities within some of those markets that are naturally lower cost, that naturally hit a different income group, that may be at the higher ends of the affordable spectrum as you look at it relative to AMI. So yeah, there are a tremendous amount of opportunities there, and it's all a matter from a market rate developer standpoint as to how big you draw your circles around your core markets, and I think those are by necessity getting bigger and bigger for those of us that have the capacity to do it, and as some of these core markets continue to get more restrictive and not less, from a capacity standpoint, there's opportunities there to continue to move out.
We'll take one more audience question. There, this one. Okay, if not, I have two closing questions. The first, probably a selfish ask, but throughout this conversation, we've also touched on how development can't be separate from the politics and the narrative. And so if you were sitting in front of, it can be a local, state, or elected official, you got 30 seconds for your one ask of what they could do to most help you generate more of the type of housing you're trying to produce, what would you say? And Antonio, I'll start with you.
Wow, 30
Glad he's
seconds.
going first.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll give you a minute. It doesn't have to be 30
yeah,
seconds.
you got to just boil it down, right?
Yes.
Money. No, money, political will, coordination, those types of things. I think again, coming back to what I was talking about earlier, the property tax exemption. And I know there's a lot of budgetary strains at the local jurisdictional level, and you got to pay for a lot of stuff, infrastructure and transit and employees and all the other things that go into running a city. But when you really boil it down in terms of the economic vitality and productivity of any local economy, any city, any even small market town, at the end of the day, you have to have people, right? And so if if you don't have that type of unit base and inventory to house people that can drive progress and productivity, then your term is probably going to be pretty short-lived. So you have to weigh the economics and kind of the pros and cons of each. I think part of the challenge is there isn't enough data, right? There is rhetoric out there, but we need more data to demonstrate what does each unit translate into, even at the local level, in terms of tax revenue, jobs, productive elements of what that can provide. So yeah, when you put me on the spot, I think I'd have to boil it down to that.
Ginger.
Councilwoman.
Oh, so it's coming to me.
Don't get in the way. But I think the reality is, I think it's really important for policymakers to consider the depth and breadth of the housing economy in the United States and the millions of households who benefit from different types of houses, and the millions of households, I believe, our estimate 3.8, who need to act, of the 3.8 million that are missing, which equate to families who are not able to access the housing opportunity that they are seeking. And that has a push-down effect. And so it is important to think about one's jurisdiction as not just the narrowly tailored, sort of cookie cutter type of properties that, frankly, your constituents might simply be comfortable with, and think about the need in terms of what will be viable for your community in the years to come. And I realize that will be hard, and I realize that is complex, but we are here to help.
Thank you.
Okay, so first thing, on a municipal level, certainly for the city, I would ask them to look at their city-owned land and how can they better utilize that for these types of housing. In Chicago, I look at tons of vacant land every single day, most of which is owned by the city. So that's low-hanging fruit. They're not doing anything with it. It helps them save their money. Let's let's dispose of that to some nonprofit or whomever who will do development for long-term affordable units. My office does work with the flexible housing pool, which is a combination of housing and health. So I would ask for money to our flexible housing pool. Several hospitals have contributed to it. It's a subsidy that goes to housing units for the healthcare system because we have a lot of frequent flyers. How do we help get them housed? So that would be my second ask. And then on the federal level, certainly I look for expansion of Medicaid, just to pay for a wider variety of housing. That on the supportive end, that would be a game changer for providing supportive services, as well as, going back to the local level, just really looking at city master and comprehensive plans that are not in alignment with their zoning codes. So you have these great lofty plans, but you haven't amended your zoning codes to allow that type of development to happen. So to really take the time to get in alignment with all of your policies.
I think when we're sitting with jurisdictions that have the political will and the wherewithal to actually make change, we're asking for collaboration, right? We're asking for collaboration and consideration around what are the things that are really barriers to us being able to make housing more affordable naturally or to build more supply. And for the cities that are willing to at least hear us out, right? I think a lot of times when we sit in front of a group of policymakers, right, particularly as a developer, I think we're kind of painted in a particular light that the things that we're looking for simply help us make more money. And so I think working through those barriers together, being open-minded about what's creating some of those barriers to more housing, and the willingness to collaborate on solutions.
All right, easy question at the end, since I sprung that one on you guys, but I just want to give you each a space to share any closing thoughts And Craig, we'll start with you and just work our way back down.
Look, I just appreciate the opportunity to be part of this group. I think as I think about what we do relative to what the other panelists do, I think my job's pretty simple, right? I think, you know, in market rate housing, sure, we all have our own challenges, and most of them are related to building and identifying land opportunities. But the challenges that the other panelists here face are far more significant in order to just create that stock. So I just appreciate the opportunity to be part of this group.
And I guess my comments kind of echo that, because thank you for actually addressing supportive housing in these spaces. That almost never comes up, but certainly I think these are the types of conversations that have to happen in order for us to move the needle, and they don't always happen. It's really exciting to see housing being addressed on every level right now, and it's sad that it took us to get to pretty much a crisis to get there. But it certainly energizes me to know that the conversations are happening with people who are really energized to make some changes. The how might change, but you know, at least we're on the page that something needs to change. So I feel energized, and thank you guys and Up for Growth for giving us the platform to have this conversation.
There's been some conversation throughout the day about starter homes and the inability to access those, the lack of supply of starter homes, and I think we can all agree that that is a real issue. I think, you know, we can probably all agree that that is in part a function of supply dynamics and the fact that there is inadequate supply to meet the demand of people who are trying to access those starter homes, as well as the ability to finance those starter homes should they be available. I would just reiterate and double down on thinking about those starter homes and a bit more broadly as well, beyond the availability of those homes being as much about preservation of existing stock and making that available for use for individuals as much as it is about creating net new starter homes. I think if we can find that balance and meet people where they are, whether they are in home ownership or rental, we will make great strides towards achieving the goal of having sufficient units.
So I echo really all the comments. I'll only add, you know, from my perspective, I think this is one of the first times that I've, you know, had a conference, again, from folks from all different backgrounds and perspectives, you know, lobby, policymakers, officials, practitioners, and really the collaboration, I think, more than anything else. Gives me a lot of inspiration and encourages me. I mean, again, you know, sometimes you wake up in the morning, it's like, I love what I do, but I don't have to like it today. But I think a lot of these conversations and a lot of the ideas, some of these, you know, that I'll be taken away from these peers to hopefully make, you know, our communities a better place and our work, you know, more impactful in terms of the residents and communities that we serve. So I thank all of you. I thank Up for Growth for having us. And thank you for exceptional moderating and keeping us all in line.
Yeah. No, I just want to close by thanking each of you for being here. It was really great to hear your perspectives. I know it takes a lot to leave work, leave families, and to give of yourself, give your ideas, and to share in this way. So thank you. I want to thank each of you for hanging in with us. I know there was another session you could have gone to, but you chose to spend your time with us, and I thank you for your ideas and staying engaged. And another thank you to Up for Growth. So we'll be around, but if everyone could just give our panelists a round of applause. That'd be great.